It's 7:30 p.m. across India. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I am Tanvi Taneja, and for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in Washington, D.C., Nick Harper. Nick, good to have you with us.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 10 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. It's 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, the US announces more aid for Ukraine as America's top diplomat continues his visit to the country, and protests in New Caledonia force a potential state of emergency. But first, the headlines.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken announces an additional $2 billion worth military aid for Ukraine. Israel says it will eliminate Hamas battalions in Rafah. US's top diplomat Blinken says Israel needs clear and concrete plan for Gaza as a $1 billion package of weapons aid for Israel goes into review. France to declare a state of emergency in the Pacific island of New Caledonia as 3 people reported dead in rioting after the passage of a key electoral reform today. And Bharat Pavilion inaugurated at the 77th Cannes Film Festival in France with the theme Create in India to promote the Indian film community. Now, amid the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asserted that eliminating Hamas in the Gaza Strip is imperative for the emergence of an alternative Palestinian governance model. He further stated that leaving Hamas in place would pose a threat to potential successors. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Forces released a video showing military operations in eastern Rafah and said that its troops are intensifying operations after they eliminated a Hamas training compound. Israel has ordered civilians to evacuate parts of Rafah as nearly 450,000 people have fled the city since May the 6th. The Israeli army released a drone footage on Tuesday which showed armed men standing next to the UN-marked vehicles at a United Nations location in the southern Gazan city of Rafah. The IDF has called on the UN to investigate. Meanwhile, a UN RWA spokesperson said that the agency was examining the footage and would share information once it becomes available. Now, in a major boost for Israel, the US State Department has moved a $1 billion package of weapons aid into review by the US Congress. According to officials, the latest weapons package includes tank rounds, mortars, and armed tactical vehicles. President Joe Biden said last week that he had delayed a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel over concerns that they might be used for a major operation in Rafah. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the U.S. would continue to provide military assistance that is provided in this operation in a $26 billion supplemental funding bill passed last month. Now, the United Nations has launched an investigation into an unidentified strike on a UN car in Rafah on Monday that killed its first international staffer in Gaza since October the 7th. The staff member, a retired Indian Army officer named Vaibhav Anil Kale, was working with the UN Department of Safety and Security and was en route to the European hospital in Rafah along with a colleague who was also injured in the attack. Meanwhile, India's External Affairs Ministry has said that the Indian missions in the UN in Israel are assisting in bringing back the mortal remains of the retired Colonel Vaibhav Anil Kale, adding that the missions are in touch with the relevant authorities regarding the investigation into the incident. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is on a visit to Kiev, said that Israel needs a clear and concrete plan for the future of Gaza. He was speaking during a joint press conference with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, and during this conference, Blinken stated that Gaza faced the potential for a power vacuum that could become filled by chaos.
With regard to Gaza, one of the deep concerns that we have is the impact of this limited operation that we've seen to date in Rafah on the ability to provide humanitarian assistance. And we've seen at the very time when Israel was taking important and much needed steps to improve the provision of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in Gaza, we've seen a negative impact on the fact that we have this very active conflict in the Rafah area. That only underscores the imperative of having a clear, concrete plan for the day after the conflict in Gaza in terms of governance, in terms of security, in terms of rebuilding Gaza for its people.
So a lot was said in the joint press conference here of the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. The most prominent announcement being that U.S. deciding to give another $2 billion in military financing to Ukraine. Now, my colleague Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Nick, everything happening quite fast here.
That's right, Tanvi. It's certainly been a busy couple of days for Antony Blinken. He is there and has been holding that joint press conference in Kiev with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. He announced an additional $2 billion of foreign military aid for Ukraine, adding that the support would be aimed at investing in Ukraine's industrial base.
We will provide an additional $2 billion in foreign military financing for Ukraine. And we put this together in a first-of-its-kind defense enterprise fund. And it has three components. One is to provide weapons today, so this will assist Ukraine in acquiring those weapons. Two is to focus as well on something that Dmytro just talked about, investing in Ukraine's defense industrial base, helping to strengthen even more its capacity.
Meanwhile, as part of his trip, Blinken also paid his respects as he laid a wreath at the Wall of Remembrance in Kiev on Wednesday. Ukraine's foreign minister accompanied him as part of that visit. Meanwhile, Ukraine has claimed that Russian forces are establishing positions in Ukraine's Vovchansk town in the Kharkiv region. With these military advancements in the northern region of the country, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has postponed all upcoming foreign visits. Meanwhile, speaking about U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to Kiev, Russia's foreign ministry on Wednesday said that it will destroy all military equipment supplied to Kiev by the United States.
It is obvious that the United States continue twisting arms of their so-called allies, demanding them to solve their assigned tasks immediately. No military equipment, we'd like to disappoint them, will save the Zelensky regime from collapse. All of the military equipment supplied to Ukraine will be destroyed.
Well, DD India's Dasha Chonashova has been following all of this from Moscow, from where she sent this report.
Well, certainly Moscow repeats its position that it is demilitarizing Ukraine, and to do that, Moscow says it is destroying all the Western-supplied weapons. So the Russian Foreign Ministry is only reiterating its position. Having said that, keep in mind that Russia is now advancing on the Kharkiv direction. We've heard from the Russian MOD that they have now under their control two more villages, the village of Gluboko as well as Yukianits in the Kharkiv region. That brings to 12 the number of villages that have been, as Moscow calls it, liberated on this direction since the 10th of May. Also on the Zaporizhia direction, we understand that Moscow now says it has under its control the village of Rabotina. More advancements on the battlefield, Moscow says, because Russia is on the upper footing at the moment. And as Russia has appointed a new Minister of Defense, Andrei Belousov, the expectation is that Moscow will be streamlining the produced weapons to the battlefield. So certainly the understanding at the moment is that Moscow will continue to demilitarize Ukraine and thus destroy the supply from weapons from the West.
France is set to declare a state of emergency in New Caledonia after at least 3 people were killed in riots over a change in voting rules. French President Emmanuel Macron's office said that the state of emergency would be adopted after a cabinet meeting, which will be held shortly. Over 130 arrests have also been made so far. It comes after lawmakers in Paris voted in favour of a bill that allows French residents who've lived in New Caledonia for 10 years to vote in provincial elections there. With 351 votes in favour, the French government said that change is needed to make elections more democratic. DD India's Ross Cullen sent us this report from Paris.
Well, the state of emergency was announced by the President Emmanuel Macron in a communique released by the Élysée Palace, that's the French presidency, on Wednesday afternoon. I've got the communique here. I'll read you some of what Emmanuel Macron set out in that official statement. He said that he thanked the politicians from across the spectrum who've been calling for calm. He also said he wanted to pay tribute to the security services who have been working to try to protect the population in New Caledonia. He did say that all violence is intolerable and will be met with an implacable response to restore order, confirming that state of emergency is in place and also confirming that sadly 3 people have now died in the unrest on the French Pacific island and a police officer is in a serious condition in hospital with a gunshot wound. All of the rioting and the looting that we have seen began on Monday in response to protests that got violent because there have been demonstrations against constitutional reform. That reform was passed here in Paris by MPs on Tuesday night, local time. The unrest has been taking place before the vote, during the vote, and now on Wednesday after the vote as well. That reform will allow French residents who've been living in New Caledonia for at least 10 years to be able to vote in local elections, something that native New Caledonians thinks would potentially dilute the vote of indigenous people from the island, the indigenous Kanak people. And so we have seen police stations attacked, cars set on fire, and general unrest as well, with hundreds of people injured and hundreds of arrests in New Caledonia, which is now confirmed on Wednesday under a state of emergency. Ross Cullen in Paris, reporting for DD India.
Moving to Georgia now, in the capital Tbilisi, where thousands of protesters have shut down a major intersection after Parliament passed the 3rd and final reading of a so-called Foreign Agents Bill. The legislation now faces a likely vote by Georgia's president, which the Parliament can override by holding an additional vote. The Foreign Agents Law would require organisations that receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad to register as agents of foreign influence. Well, NATO has also expressed concerns about the new law, saying it is a step in the wrong direction. The EU has instead urged Tbilisi to stick with the democratic path to bloc membership.
Let me be very clear. The adoption of the Foreign Agents Law, as well as continued repression against Georgia's civil society, will stop Georgia's further progress on EU and NATO path. If this happens, responsibility will lie squarely on Georgia's government. However, it is still not too late.
Well, DD India's Giles Gibson has been following all of this and joins us live now from Rome. Giles, the European Commission has now responded to the vote in the Georgian Parliament. What's been going on behind the scenes?
Well, out in public, Nick, the statement is very clear in its condemnation of the Georgian Parliament passing this piece of legislation, saying that the adoption of this law negatively impacts Georgia's progress on the EU path, its path towards becoming a full member of the European Union. And the European Commission also urged the government to immediately withdraw this bill. Now, we understand, according to reports, that behind the scenes there's been a lot of sort of wrangling amongst EU states about exactly how they're going to respond to this legislation in the Georgian parliament. Initially, we understand there was a push for there to be a statement from the EU27, from the EU member states themselves, but we are hearing that that move was resisted by both Slovakia and Hungary, and that is, we believe, why we now have this statement instead from Josep Borrell, who is the EU's top diplomat at the European Commission, as well as Oliver Varhelyi, who is the enlargement commissioner. However, even that, we understand, was a little bit complicated behind the scenes because Varhelyi himself is a Hungarian who is nominated by the Hungarian parliament to that position. So we do now have a statement from the European Commission pretty clearly condemning this, but behind the scenes we understand there's been a huge amount of sort of wrangling and negotiations over in Brussels.
And Giles, now that the Georgian parliament has approved this bill, how do you see things developing from here?
Well, the next step in the constitutional process, if you like, is for the Georgian president, Salome Zurabishvili, to sign this bill into law. But she has, for many days now, made it very clear that she has absolutely no intention of doing that, that she is going to veto this bill instead. And she made her opposition to the legislation clear once again for another time, speaking to Georgian media earlier in the day. As you were mentioning earlier, the issue with that is that even if she vetoes this legislation, the Georgian parliament can simply respond by passing it into law once again with a simple majority. They don't even need a supermajority, so to speak, to override the veto of the president. What we're also hearing from the president, though, is even if this law does go into effect in the next few weeks or so, she is saying that the time to really push back will be in October, because the country is set to go to the polls then in about, 5-6 months' time. And she is saying that is going to be the opportunity for Georgians to vote in a new government that would potentially reverse this legislation.
Giles Gibson, thank you. That was Giles Gibson joining us live from Rome, detailing how things could play out over the coming months in Georgia. Well, that's a wrap from me here in Washington. Tanvi, I'm going to throw it back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Nick. Nick Harper joining us all from Washington, D.C. You're watching DD India Global. Still to come on the show. Islamabad High Court grants bail to former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan in a graft case. All this as the country's economic woes continue. And electioneering in full swing for the last 3 phases of India's ongoing elections. Voting on May 20th across 49 constituencies in 6 states and 2 union territories.
As India decides in the world's largest election,
we help you feel the pulse of the nation.
I am Sakal Bhatt.
I am Shubhendu Ghosh.
This election season, join us on a journey of India.
We are in Assam. This is the tea city of India.
From down south, Tamil Nadu.
Discover the colors of democracy.
Gateway to northeast of India.
Coastal state of Kerala. Watch Poll Pulse on DT India.
Thank you for staying with us. I am Tanvi Taneja and you're watching DD India Global. Back to Asia now. Former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan was granted bail by a court in Islamabad on Wednesday in a land corruption case. The former cricketer was indicted on charges that he was gifted land by a real estate developer when Khan was the Prime Minister in exchange for illegal favours. Despite the bail, Khan is in jail since August last year. Will not be immediately released as he is serving sentences in 2 other cases. Sri Lanka is in discussion with India to establish an arms manufacturing unit in the island nation. Sri Lanka's State Defence Minister Premita Bandara Tennakoon said that discussions are ongoing at the moment with India to set up the small arms manufacturing unit.
Bilaterals there is an official creditor committee which has been formed. They are looking at it. We have individually spoken to all the countries, including China and India. Overall, they are happy with the parameters which are being given by the IMF, but there are some nitty-gritties to be sorted out. We expect that to be signed during the month of June, hopefully.
India's Ministry of Home Affairs on Wednesday handed over citizenship certificates to 14 people under the Citizenship Amendment Act. The Home Secretary Ajay Kumar Bhalla handed over these citizenship certificates to some applicants in New Delhi. Home Secretary congratulated the applicants and highlighted the salient features of the Citizenship Rules 2024. The Government of India had notified the Citizenship Amendment Rules 2024 on 11th of March this year. Moving a bit towards the north in Asia, Russian President Vladimir Putin will visit China on Thursday and hold talks with his counterpart Xi Jinping over regional issues and cooperation in various fields. The two leaders are expected to sign a joint statement and ink several bilateral documents. Before his visit, the Russian president in an interview said that he backed China's plan for a peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis and said that Beijing had a full understanding of what lay behind this crisis. All right, next we get you the latest on India's elections. So electioneering continues to gain momentum ahead of the phase 5th of India's general elections, as 49 seats are going to polls in this phase on May the 20th. Prime Minister and senior BJP leader Narendra Modi addressed a public meeting in Maharashtra's Dindori. Today, addressing the people, the Indian Prime Minister said that the partnership of Congress and what he called was fake Shiv Sena was a partnership of misdoing. The senior BJP leader will also hold a public meeting in Mumbai's northeast Kalyan region. So more on the campaigning underway. BJP leader and Union Home Minister Amit Shah addressed an election rally in West Bengal's Serampur today. Another BJP candidate and stalwart Defence Minister Rajnath Singh addressed a rally in Lucknow. Rajnath Singh is seeking a third term as a Member of Parliament from the Lucknow constituency. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi addressed a public meeting in the state of Odisha today. He said that a list of poor families will be finalized and a woman chosen from each family and an amount of 8,500 rupees each will be given to these women. Congress General Secretary Priyanka Gandhi Vadra addressed a public meeting in Uttar Pradesh's Rai Bareli today. Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge held a joint press conference with Samajwadi Party Chief Akhilesh Yadav in Lucknow. Kharge also held a public meeting in Rai Bareli today. And on to France now. The Bharat Pavilion was inaugurated on Wednesday at the Cannes Film Festival, the 77th edition, with the theme Create in Bharat. This pavilion is named as the Sutradhar of the world, Sutradhar meaning the narrator, and the pavilion was inaugurated by Secretary of India's Ministry of Information and Broadcasting Sanjay Jaju and the Ambassador of India to France and Monaco, Javed Ashraf. Speaking at the occasion, the INB Secretary said that India has a deeply rooted historical and cultural relationship with cinema.
Information and Broadcasting Secretary Shri Sanjay Jaju. He is heading the Indian delegation to Cannes this year in 2024. Welcome, Secretary Sir, to DD India. You inaugurated the Bharat Pavilion. It's a pavilion in a new avatar this time around, and you spoke about how we've borrowed from Natya Shastra this time around. Tell us, what does a pavilion in a new avatar really mean for India as a country, for Bharat as a country?
So, Bharat is not, in few years going to be the third largest economy in the world. We have the largest segment of our population living outside India. In fact, it's not just the economic ascendance that we are achieving, but at the same time, our soft power, our soft touch is also becoming and getting amplified all across the world. So we through the Bharat Pavilion, we wanted to convey that cinema or Natya Shastra goes back 2,500 years or even beyond, and that's how we picked up the theme from Natya Shastra, how this concept of Sutradhar started from our Natya Shastra, and all the nuances of filmmaking are actually spelled out in the Natya Shastra. And that's how, movies came to India, I think within a span of their inventions all over. Because, we have this whole culture of song, dance, drama embedded in our national ethos, in our DNA. And so we wanted to convey that through the India Pavilion and present a very composite picture so that all the industry associations, film associations, all combine and join under this overarching umbrella of Bharat Pavilion.
Excuse me. And now we take you to Japan's Kyoto, where people in traditional costumes paraded through the streets on Wednesday for the annual Aoi Matsuri festival. The festival is one of Kyoto's 3 biggest festivals and dates back 1400 years. It features a procession decorated with oi or hollyhock leaves.
Officials in the imperial court, dancers, musicians, offerings from the emperor.
So with that, it's a wrap on this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on our different social media handles at DD India Live. And also you can catch all the latest news and updates on our DD India mobile app. So we'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from all of us here in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.